My name is Jennifer, and I never thought I'd be that woman. You know the one. The woman who finds her husband cheating and loses her mind. The woman who becomes a cautionary tale, a story people whisper about at dinner parties. But life has a funny way of turning you into exactly what you swore you'd never be. I'd been married to Marcus for 11 years. 11 years of what I thought was a solid marriage. We had our ups and downs, sure, but doesn't everyone? We had a beautiful home in the suburbs, 2 cars, a golden retriever named Biscuit, and a routine that felt comfortable, safe even. I worked as a pediatric nurse at the local hospital, and Marcus was a financial consultant who traveled frequently for work. Or at least, that's what he told me. Looking back now, I can see all the signs I missed. The late-night texts he'd quickly hide when I walked into the room, the sudden interest in going to the gym and buying new cologne, the business trips that seemed to multiply, especially on weekends, the way he'd started calling me by my full name Jennifer instead of Jen or Jenna like he used to. But when you trust someone, really trust them, you don't see what's right in front of your face. You tell yourself stories to explain away the inconsistencies. You convince yourself that everything is fine because the alternative is too terrifying to consider. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late September when my entire world collapsed. I'd been scheduled to work the evening shift, but one of the other nurses called in sick at the last minute, so they asked me to swap shifts. I didn't think twice about it. I texted Marcus to let him know I'd be home early, but he didn't respond. That wasn't unusual. He often got caught up in meetings and forgot to check his phone. I pulled into our driveway around 2:30 in the afternoon. The first thing I noticed was an unfamiliar silver sedan parked on the street in front of our house. My stomach did a little flip, but I told myself it was probably just a neighbor's guest. Nothing to worry about. I grabbed my bag from the passenger seat and walked up to the front door, fishing my keys out of my purse. The house was quiet when I stepped inside. Too quiet. Biscuit usually came running to greet me the second I opened the door, his tail wagging so hard his whole body shook. But today, there was nothing. No clicking of paws on hardwood, no excited barking, just silence. "Amanda," I said, calling out. "Marcus, anybody home?" Still nothing. I set my bag down on the console table in the entryway and kicked off my shoes. Maybe they'd taken Biscuit for a walk. That would explain the quiet. But then I heard it, a sound that made my blood run cold. A woman's laugh, light and breathy, coming from upstairs, from our bedroom. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My hands went numb. For a moment, I just stood there in the hallway, frozen, trying to convince myself that I was wrong, that there was some logical explanation. Maybe Marcus was watching something on his laptop. Maybe it was the TV. Maybe I was losing my mind. But I wasn't wrong. Deep down, I knew exactly what was happening upstairs. I climbed the stairs slowly, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. Each step felt like walking toward the edge of a cliff. Part of me wanted to turn around, to leave the house and pretend I'd never come home early. Ignorance is bliss, right? But another part of me, a stronger part, needed to know the truth. I needed to see it with my own eyes. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. I could hear voices now, murmuring and laughing. Marcus's voice, deep and familiar, and her voice, whoever she was. I pushed the door open, and there they were. My husband of 11 years in our bed, with a woman I'd never seen before. She was young, maybe 25, with long red hair spread out across my pillow. They were tangled up in the sheets that I'd washed and folded just 3 days earlier. For a second, time seemed to stop. They both froze when they saw me standing in the doorway. The woman let out a little gasp and grabbed the sheet to cover herself. Marcus sat up, his face draining of all color. "Jenna," he said, his voice cracking. "Jenna, wait, this isn't what it looks like." I just stared at him. This isn't what it looks like? Really? That's what he was going with? I felt like I was watching the scene from outside my own body, like I was a character in a movie, and none of this was really happening to me. "Get out," I said quietly. "Both of you. Get out of my house right now." "Jenna, please let me explain," Marcus said, climbing out of bed and reaching for his pants. "Please, just give me a chance to explain." The woman, whoever she was scrambling to put her clothes on, her face bright red. I watched her fumble with her bra clasp, her hands shaking. She wouldn't make eye contact with me. "I said get out," I screamed, my voice breaking. I didn't recognize the sound coming out of my own mouth. It was raw and primal, filled with a rage I didn't know I was capable of feeling. The woman practically ran out of the room, clutching her shoes to her chest. I heard her footsteps thundering down the stairs and the front door slamming shut a few seconds later. Marcus was still standing there in his boxer shorts, looking at me with this pathetic, pleading expression. Jenna, please, he said again. I'm so sorry. I made a terrible mistake. It meant nothing. She means nothing. Please, we can work through this. How long? I asked. My voice was steady now, cold. How long has this been going on? He hesitated, and I knew. I knew it wasn't just a mistake, wasn't just a one-time thing. How long, Marcus? 6 months, he finally admitted, his eyes dropping to the floor. Maybe 7. 7 months. While I'd been working double shifts at the hospital to help save for the vacation to Italy we'd been planning. While I'd been making his favorite dinners and doing his laundry and sleeping next to him every night, trusting him completely. 7 months. Get out, I said again. Pack a bag and get out. Now. Jenna, this is my house too. You can't just kick me out. Watch me, I said. You have 10 minutes to pack what you need and leave. If you're not gone by then, I'm calling the police. For a moment, I thought he might argue, but something in my face must have told him I wasn't bluffing. He grabbed some clothes from the closet and stuffed them into a duffel bag, all the while trying to talk to me, trying to apologize, trying to explain. I didn't hear a word he said. There was this rushing sound in my ears like I was underwater. When he finally left, I locked the door behind him and stood there in the silence of our empty house. Biscuit came out from wherever he'd been hiding and pressed his nose against my leg. I sank down onto the floor and wrapped my arms around him. And that's when I finally started to cry. Big, ugly, gasping sobs that shook my whole body. I don't know how long I sat there on the floor. Could have been minutes. Could have been hours. Eventually, the tears stopped, and I felt this strange, cold clarity settle over me. I wasn't going to be the woman who fell apart. I wasn't going to be the woman who begged her cheating husband to come back. I was going to be the woman who burned it all down and started over. The next few days were a blur. I called in sick to work, which I never did. I stopped answering calls from Marcus, from his mother, from our mutual friends. I just stayed in the house with Biscuit, trying to figure out what to do next. I knew I should call a lawyer, start divorce proceedings, but I couldn't seem to make myself do it. I was stuck, paralyzed by shock and grief and rage. It was my best friend, Daniela, who finally snapped me out of it. She showed up at my door on Friday afternoon with a bottle of wine and a pizza. Okay, she said, pushing past me into the house. I've given you 3 days to wallow. Now it's time to do something about this. What am I supposed to do? I asked, following her into the kitchen. He cheated on me. For 7 months. With some random woman he probably met at a bar. What am I supposed to do with that? Daniela poured us each a large glass of wine and sat down at the kitchen table. You're supposed to take him for everything he's worth, she said bluntly. You're supposed to get a lawyer and make sure he pays for what he did. I don't want his money, I said. I just want him to hurt the way I'm hurting. Then make him hurt, Daniela said, leaning forward. Look, I'm not saying you should do anything crazy, but there are ways to make him regret what he did without breaking the law. That's when the idea started forming in my mind. Marcus cared about 2 things above everything else, his reputation and his stuff. He'd spent years building his image as this successful, respectable businessman. He loved showing off, loved having the nicest car and the biggest TV and the most expensive watch. What if I took that away from him? What are you thinking? Daniela asked, looking at me suspiciously. I know that look. That's your scheming look. I'm thinking, I said slowly, that Marcus has always been so proud of his stuff. His collection of vintage records, his golf clubs, his fancy suits. What if all of that stuff just disappeared? Daniela's eyes widened. Jenna, you can't steal his stuff. That's illegal. I'm not talking about stealing it, I said. It's in my house, technically our house. I'm just talking about getting rid of it. Getting rid of it how? I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. Over the next week, I made a plan. Marcus had been staying at his brother's place, and he'd been texting me constantly, begging me to talk to him, to let him come home and get the rest of his things. I ignored him, let him sweat. Meanwhile, I started going through the house, cataloging everything that belonged to him. His record collection, worth thousands of dollars. His golf clubs, custom-made and ridiculously expensive. His suits, all designer labels. His watch collection. His gaming console and all his games. His hockey memorabilia, everything. I rented a storage unit across town and started moving things out of the house, bit by bit. I didn't want to sell his stuff. That felt too easy, too clean. I wanted him to feel the same violation I'd felt when I walked in on him with that woman. I wanted him to feel like something had been taken from him that he could never get back. But as I was packing up his stuff, I kept finding evidence of his affair. Receipts from restaurants I'd never been to. Hotel bookings for weekends when he'd claimed to be out of town for work. Text messages on an old phone he'd left in his nightstand drawer. Messages to her, the redhead, whose name I learned was Vanessa. Messages that made me physically sick to read. Messages where he talked about me, called me boring, said he was only staying in the marriage because of the house and the dog. That's when something inside me snapped. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was furious, incandescent with rage. He'd made a fool of me for 7 months, and now he had the audacity to act like he was the victim? To call me boring? To reduce our entire marriage to a house and a dog? I canceled the storage unit. I had a better idea. It was a Saturday afternoon in mid-October when I decided to go through with it. Marcus had texted me that morning saying he was going to come by the house that evening to pick up the rest of his stuff, whether I liked it or not. Fine, I thought. Let him come. Let him see what happens when you betray someone who trusted you completely. I spent the afternoon dragging everything of his into the backyard. The record collection, the golf clubs, the suits, the watches, the gaming console, all of it. I piled it up in the middle of the lawn, creating this massive tower of Marcus's precious belongings. Biscuit watched me from the porch, his head tilted to the side like he was trying to figure out what I was doing. When everything was piled up, I stood back and looked at it. 11 years of marriage, reduced to a heap of stuff in the backyard. It felt fitting somehow. This was all we'd really built together. Not a life, not a partnership, just an accumulation of things. I went back into the house and found the lighter fluid we kept for the grill. I walked back outside and started dousing the pile, emptying the entire bottle over Marcus's belongings. The chemical smell was sharp and acrid, making my eyes water. Or maybe that was the tears. I couldn't tell anymore. I pulled out the matches I'd grabbed from the kitchen drawer. My hands were shaking as I struck one, watching the small flame flicker to life. For a moment, I hesitated. This was crazy, right? This was going too far. I should just donate this stuff to charity, file for divorce, and move on with my life like a normal person. But I wasn't a normal person anymore. I was someone who'd had her heart ripped out and stomped on. I was someone who'd been lied to for 7 months straight. I was someone who'd been called boring by the man who'd promised to love her forever. I dropped the match. The pile went up faster than I expected. 1 second it was just a small flame licking at the edge of a suit jacket, and the next second the whole thing was engulfed in fire. The heat hit me like a wall, forcing me to stumble backward. The flames climbed higher and higher, black smoke billowing into the evening sky. I stood there watching it burn, feeling this strange sense of satisfaction mixed with horror at what I'd done. The records were melting, the golf clubs were blackening, the suits were disintegrating. Everything Marcus had cared so much about was turning to ash right in front of my eyes. That's when I heard the sirens. Apparently, one of my neighbors had seen the smoke and called 911. Within minutes, there were 2 fire trucks pulling up in front of my house, firefighters jumping out and running into my backyard with hoses. I just stood there, frozen, watching them put out my revenge fire. "Ma'am, are you all right?" one of the firefighters asked, grabbing my arm and pulling me further away from the smoke. "Ma'am, can you hear me? Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," I said numbly. "I'm fine." "What happened here?" he asked, looking from me to the smoldering pile in the middle of my lawn. "How did this fire start?" "I started it," I said simply. "I lit it on purpose." The firefighter's expression changed from concern to confusion. "You lit this fire on purpose? Why would you do that?" "It was my husband's stuff," I explained. "He cheated on me, so I burned his stuff." The firefighter blinked at me, clearly not sure how to respond to that. Behind him, I could see more neighbors gathering on the street, watching the spectacle. Someone was filming on their phone. Great, just great. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step over here," another firefighter said, guiding me toward the porch. "Someone's going to want to talk to you about this." That someone turned out to be 2 police officers who arrived about 10 minutes later. They asked me a lot of questions. Was I trying to hurt anyone? No. Did I know it was dangerous to light a fire like that in a residential area? Yes, obviously, but I wasn't thinking clearly. Was I aware that I could have started a much bigger fire that could have spread to neighboring properties? Yes, and I was sorry about that. They were surprisingly understanding, actually. One of them, Officer Martinez, pulled me aside while her partner was talking to the fire chief. "Look," she said quietly, "I get it. I really do. My ex-husband cheated on me too. Believe me, I wanted to do a lot worse than burn his stuff. But you can't do this, you understand? You could have hurt someone. You could have burned down your house, your neighbors' houses." "I know," I said, my eyes filling with tears. "I know. I wasn't thinking. I was so angry, and I wanted him to feel the same pain I was feeling, and I just lost it." "I understand," Officer Martinez said, "but anger like that, it only hurts you in the end. Trust me on this. The best revenge is living well and moving on. not ending up with criminal charges. Am I going to jail? I asked, my voice small. Not today, she said. We're going to call this an incident of improper burning within city limits. You'll get a fine, probably a hefty one, and you're going to have to pay for the fire department response. But as long as you promise me you're not going to do anything like this again, I think we can keep this out of the criminal system. I promise, I said quickly. I swear nothing like this will ever happen again. She patted my shoulder and went back to talk to her partner. I sat down on the porch steps, Biscuit pressing against my side, and watched the firefighters finish putting out the last of the flames. The pile of Marcus's belongings was just a smoking, soggy mess now, totally destroyed. There was no satisfaction in seeing it like that, just this hollow, empty feeling in my chest. That's when Marcus's car pulled into the driveway. Perfect timing, as always. He jumped out of his car and ran toward the backyard, his face going pale when he saw the firefighters and the destroyed pile. "What the hell did you do?" he screamed, running up to me. "Jenna, what the hell did you do?" "I burned your stuff," I said flatly. "I burned it all." "Are you insane? Do you know how much that stuff was worth? That was my record collection. Those were my grandfather's golf clubs. You're going to pay for this, Jenna. I'm going to sue you for every penny you have." "Go ahead," I said, standing up to face him. "Sue me. Add it to the divorce papers. See if I care." "Sir, you need to calm down," Officer Martinez said, stepping between us. "This isn't helping anyone." "She destroyed my property," Marcus yelled. "She destroyed thousands of dollars worth of my belongings." "It was in her house," Officer Martinez said calmly. "And technically, it's still marital property until the divorce is finalized. So legally speaking, it's a gray area." "A gray area?" Marcus sputtered. "She committed arson." "She lit a fire on her own property," Officer Martinez corrected. "It was stupid and dangerous, but it wasn't technically arson. Now, I'm going to ask you one more time to calm down, or I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Marcus looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Officer Martinez's expression made him think better of it. He turned back to me, his face twisted with rage. "You're crazy," he said. "You're actually crazy. I can't believe I wasted 11 years of my life with you." And just like that, any remaining sympathy I had for him vanished. I stepped forward, getting right in his face. "You wasted 11 years?" I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You wasted 11 years? I gave you 11 years of my life, Marcus. I loved you. I trusted you. I built a life with you. And you threw it all away for some random woman you met at a bar. So don't you dare stand there and tell me you wasted your time. You don't get to be the victim here." He opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off. "Get off my property," I said, "and don't come back. Have your lawyer contact my lawyer. From now on, we communicate through attorneys only." I turned and walked into the house, slamming the door behind me before he could say anything else. I leaned against the door, my whole body shaking with adrenaline and leftover rage. Outside, I could hear Marcus yelling, the police officers telling him to leave, car doors slamming, then finally silence. I slid down onto the floor, Biscuit immediately curling up in my lap. I buried my face in his fur and let myself cry. Not sad tears this time. Angry tears. Frustrated tears. Tears for the marriage I'd thought I had and the life I'd thought I was building. Tears for the woman I used to be, who trusted too easily and believed too readily. That woman was gone. She'd burned up in that fire along with Marcus's precious belongings. The next few weeks were rough, really rough. The fire made the local news. Someone's phone video went viral on social media. I became a meme for a hot minute, the crazy woman who burned her husband's stuff. People I hadn't talked to in years were reaching out, some to offer support, some just to get the gossip. I deleted all my social media accounts and threw myself into work. The hospital became my refuge. When I was at work, taking care of sick kids and worried parents, I didn't have time to think about Marcus, or the fire, or the divorce. I picked up extra shifts whenever I could, sometimes working 12 or 14 hours at a stretch. My coworkers worried about me, but I told them I was fine. I just needed to stay busy. The fine from the city was steep. $3,000 for improper burning and another $2,000 for the fire department response. Plus, I had to pay to have the scorched section of my lawn resodded. All told, my moment of revenge cost me close to $7,000. Money I'd been saving for that trip to Italy. The trip that would never happen now. But the worst part wasn't the money or the public humiliation. It was the realization that nothing I did to Marcus could hurt him as much as he'd hurt me. I could burn every possession he owned, could embarrass him in front of the whole town, could take him for everything in the divorce, and it still wouldn't equal the pain of finding him in our bed with another woman. It wouldn't undo those 7 months of lies. It wouldn't give me back the trust I'd lost, not just in him, but in myself and my own judgment. About a month after the fire, I finally met with a divorce attorney. Her name was Patricia Chen, and she came highly recommended by Daniela, who'd been through her own messy divorce a few years earlier. "So," Patricia said, folding her hands on her desk after I'd told her the whole sordid story, "you burned his belongings in your backyard." "I did," I admitted. "It was stupid and impulsive, and I regret it. Well, sort of." Patricia smiled slightly. "I'm not here to judge you, Jennifer. I'm here to help you get through this divorce with as much of your dignity and your assets intact as possible. Now, the fire complicates things slightly. Marcus's attorney is going to try to use it to paint you as unstable, possibly try to get you to cover the value of the destroyed property." "How much trouble am I in?" I asked. "Honestly, not as much as you could be. The fact that it was marital property works in your favor, and based on what you've told me about the evidence of his affair, we have a strong case for emotional distress. But Jennifer, you need to promise me something." "What?" "No more fires," Patricia said seriously. "No more revenge plots. From here on out, you let me handle Marcus. That's what I'm here for." "I promise," I said. "No more fires." "Good. Now let's talk about what you want from this divorce." Over the next hour, Patricia walked me through the process. We'd file for divorce on the grounds of adultery, which in our state meant I had a strong case for getting the house and a larger share of the marital assets. Marcus's affair, especially the length of it, worked heavily in my favor. We'd push for him to cover my legal fees and the cost of the fire fines, arguing that they were a direct result of his infidelity. It wasn't guaranteed, but Patricia thought we had a good shot. "What about Biscuit?" I asked. "We adopted him together. Can he try to get custody of the dog?" "Legally, pets are considered property," Patricia explained. "But given that you've been his primary caretaker, and Marcus is currently living in his brother's apartment that doesn't allow dogs, I think we can make a strong argument that Biscuit should stay with you." Relief washed over me. I could handle losing the house, losing money, losing all of it, but I couldn't lose Biscuit. The divorce proceedings dragged on for months. Marcus contested everything, trying to claim that my erratic and destructive behavior made me unfit to keep the house. His attorney argued that the fire proved I was mentally unstable. My attorney countered with evidence of his affair, including some of those text messages I'd found where he'd talked about me in the most demeaning terms possible. Through it all, I kept working, kept going to therapy, kept putting one foot in front of the other. Some days were better than others. Some days I felt strong and confident, ready to face whatever came next. Other days, I could barely get out of bed. The grief would hit me in waves, usually at the most unexpected times. I'd be walking through the grocery store and see Marcus's favorite brand of beer, and suddenly I'd be fighting back tears in the middle of the frozen food aisle. My therapist, Dr. Reeves, helped me understand that grief isn't linear. It doesn't follow a neat progression from shock to anger to acceptance. It's messy and complicated and unpredictable. Some days you feel like you're healing, and then something small sends you spiraling backward. That was okay. That was normal. That was part of the process. What you did with the fire, Dr. Reeves said during one of our sessions, wasn't healthy, but it was understandable. You were in pain and you lashed out. The important thing is that you recognize it was a mistake and that you're finding healthier ways to process your anger now. "But I still feel angry," I told her, "all the time. Even on good days, there's this anger simmering just beneath the surface. What if it never goes away?" "It might not go away completely," Dr. Reeves said gently, "but it will change. Right now, the anger is sharp and hot and overwhelming. Eventually, it will become something smaller, something more manageable. You'll carry it with you, but it won't control you the way it does now." I wanted to believe her. I really did. Dr. Reeves also helped me work through the guilt I felt about the fire. Not guilt about destroying Marcus's things, surprisingly, but guilt about what could have happened. What if the fire had spread to the neighbor's fence? What if someone had gotten hurt? What if I'd burned down my own house with Biscuit inside? The what-ifs kept me up at night, spiraling into anxiety attacks that left me gasping for breath on my bathroom floor. We worked on grounding techniques. 5 things I could see, 4 things I could touch, 3 things I could hear, 2 things I could smell, 1 thing I could taste. It sounds simple, almost silly, but it helped pull me back from the edge when the panic threatened to overwhelm me. Dr. Reeves also encouraged me to write letters I'd never send. Letters to Marcus, letters to Vanessa, letters to my younger self. The first letter I wrote to Marcus was 20 pages long, filled with every angry, hurt, betrayed thought I'd been holding inside. I wrote about how he'd made me feel invisible, how he'd stolen years of my life, how he'd destroyed my ability to trust. When I finished, I read it out loud to Dr. Reeves, and then we burned it together in her office fireplace. A controlled burn this time. A ritual of release. The painting helped too, but it was the therapy that gave me the tools to actually process what had happened instead of just reacting to it. I learned that my anger was valid, but I also learned that I didn't have to let it consume me. I could acknowledge it, feel it, and then choose how to respond to it. It was Daniela who finally forced me to start thinking about life beyond the divorce. We were having dinner at her place one evening in early March, about 5 months after everything had happened. The divorce was still grinding through the court system, but Patricia was confident we'd reach a settlement soon. "So what are you going to do after?" Daniela asked, refilling my wine glass. "After what?" "After the divorce is finalized. What are you going to do with your life?" "I don't know," I said. "Keep working, take care of Biscuit, figure things out." "That's not a plan, Jen. That's just existing." "What do you want me to say? That I'm going to jet off to Europe and find myself? That I'm going to start dating again? I'm not ready for any of that." "I'm not saying you need to do any of those things," Daniela said, "but you need to start thinking about what you want your life to look like. What makes you happy? What do you want to do that you couldn't do when you were married to Marcus?" I sat there, staring at my wine glass, trying to think of an answer. The truth was, I didn't know. I'd spent so much of the past 11 years building a life with Marcus, making decisions based on what we wanted as a couple, that I'd lost track of what I wanted as an individual. "I used to paint," I finally said. "Before I met Marcus. I loved painting. I wasn't very good at it, but I loved it. I haven't picked up a brush in years." "So start painting again," Daniela said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "It's not that simple." "Why not?" "Because I struggled to find the words. Because what if I'm not any good? What if I spent all those years thinking I loved something, and it turns out I was just kidding myself?" "Then you'll find something else you love," Daniela said. "But you have to at least try, Jen. You have to start doing things for yourself again. Things that have nothing to do with Marcus or the divorce or any of this mess." She was right. I knew she was right. But knowing something and actually doing it are two very different things. Still, a few days later, I found myself in an art supply store, wandering the aisles and looking at canvases and paints. I felt like an imposter, like everyone in the store could tell I didn't belong there. But I forced myself to pick out some supplies. Nothing fancy, just some basic acrylics, brushes, and a few small canvases. It felt indulgent and frivolous, spending money on art supplies when I was still paying off the fines from the fire. But I did it anyway. That weekend, I set up a little workspace in the spare bedroom. I put down a drop cloth, arranged my supplies, and stared at the blank canvas for about 20 minutes. I had no idea what to paint. Everything felt too loaded, too emotional. I didn't want to paint something sad and dark that screamed, "Recently divorced woman working through her trauma." But I also couldn't bring myself to paint something cheerful and pretty that felt like a lie. Finally, I just started mixing colors on my palette, not thinking too hard about it. I loaded up a brush and made a mark on the canvas. Then another, then another. Before I knew it, I was completely absorbed in the process, losing track of time as I worked. The painting that emerged wasn't good exactly. It was abstract and messy, all swirling reds and oranges and blacks. It looked like fire, I realized. Of course it did. But it felt good to create something, to take all that anger and pain and confusion and channel it into something tangible. By the time I finished, my back was sore from standing and my hands were covered in paint. Biscuit had fallen asleep at my feet. Outside, the sun was starting to set. I stepped back and looked at what I'd made. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't something I'd ever hang on a wall, but it was mine. It was proof that I could still create, still feel, still exist as something more than just Marcus's wronged wife. Over the next few weeks, I painted almost every day, sometimes for hours, sometimes just for a few minutes before bed. The paintings got better, not objectively good maybe, but better, more intentional, less chaotic. I started painting other things besides fire, trees, water, abstract patterns that felt calming. Biscuit's face, which came out looking more like a fuzzy brown blob than an actual dog, but I loved it anyway. Painting became my therapy, supplementing the actual therapy I was doing with Dr. Reeves. When I painted, I could quiet the angry voice in my head that kept replaying every moment of Marcus's betrayal. I could let go of the resentment that sat in my chest like a stone. For those few hours, I was just Jennifer, a woman with a paintbrush creating something out of nothing. The divorce was finalized in early April. After 6 months of legal wrangling, we finally reached a settlement. I got the house, Biscuit, and 60% of our combined assets. Marcus had to pay my legal fees. And to my surprise, Patricia managed to get him to cover the cost of the city fines too. In the end, I came out ahead financially, though that felt like a hollow victory. The day the papers were signed, I felt strange. Not happy exactly, but relieved. It was over. Finally, truly over. Marcus was officially my ex-husband, and I was officially a single woman for the first time in over a decade. I celebrated by taking Biscuit for a long walk in the park and then coming home and painting until midnight. I painted a sunrise, all soft pinks and golds. A new beginning. Cheesy maybe, but it felt right. Patricia called me a few days later to check in. "How are you doing?" she asked. "I'm okay," I said. "It's weird, you know. I thought I'd feel different once it was official, but I mostly just feel tired." "That's normal," Patricia said. "You've been running on adrenaline and anger for 6 months. Now that it's over, your body is probably crashing. Give yourself time to rest and recover." "I'm trying," I told her. "I'm painting a lot. That helps." "That's good. Keep doing that. And Jennifer? For what it's worth, I think you handled yourself well. Aside from the fire, of course." I laughed. "Yeah, aside from the fire." After we hung up, I sat on my back porch with a cup of tea, looking out at the yard. The scorched patch had been replaced with new sod, and you could barely tell anything had happened there. In a few months, you wouldn't be able to tell at all. The grass would grow in, and it would just be another normal suburban backyard. I thought about that a lot over the next few weeks. How time and distance could cover up even the most dramatic moments. How what felt earth-shattering in the moment could eventually fade into just another part of your history. The fire would always be part of my story, this crazy thing I did when I was at my lowest. But it wouldn't define me forever. Eventually, it would just be an anecdote, something I could laugh about with friends over drinks. I started going out more. Daniela dragged me to a yoga class, which I hated at first, but eventually grew to tolerate. I joined a book club that met at the local library. I started saying yes to social invitations instead of hiding in my house. Slowly, carefully, I started building a life that was mine alone. The other nurses at the hospital noticed the change in me. "You seem lighter," one of them, Kelly, said to me one afternoon during our break. "More like your old self." "I feel more like myself," I admitted. "It's been a long road, but I think I'm finally starting to figure out who that is." "Good for you," Kelly said, squeezing my shoulder. "You deserve to be happy, Jen." Did I deserve to be happy? I wasn't sure. But I was starting to think that maybe happiness wasn't something you deserved or didn't deserve. It was something you chose, every day, in small ways. Choosing to get out of bed, choosing to paint, choosing to spend time with friends, choosing to move forward instead of staying stuck in the past. Summer came, bringing with it long, warm days and the kind of golden light that makes everything look softer. I spent my days off in the backyard, painting outside while Biscuit napped in the shade. I'd never been happier to be alone. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't defining myself in relation to someone else. I wasn't anyone's wife or girlfriend or partner. I was just Jennifer. Just me. One Saturday in July, I was at a farmer's market downtown when I ran into Marcus. It was the first time I'd seen him since the divorce was finalized. He was with Vanessa, the redhead, and they were holding hands and looking at organic vegetables like a normal couple. My first instinct was to turn around and leave. I didn't want to see him. I didn't want to acknowledge his existence. But then something shifted inside me. I realized I didn't have to run away. I had just as much right to be there as he did. Maybe more, since I'd been going to that farmer's market for years before I'd even met him. So I stayed. I continued browsing the stalls, picking out fresh tomatoes and peaches, and a bunch of sunflowers that made me smile. My hands were steady as I paid for the flowers. No trembling, no racing heart. Just calm. It was a revelation, realizing that seeing him didn't undo all the healing I'd done. He was just a man. A man who'd hurt me, yes, but a man who no longer had power over my emotions. I was looking at handmade soaps when I heard his voice behind me. "Jen, hey." I turned around slowly. Marcus was standing there alone now, Vanessa nowhere in sight. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. He'd put on weight, I noticed. His hairline had receded a bit. He looked older somehow, more worn. "Marcus," I said neutrally, "how are you?" I'm good. You look really good." "Thanks," I said. I felt good. I'd lost some of the stress weight I'd been carrying, and my hair was longer than it had been in years. I was wearing a sundress Daniela had convinced me to buy, telling me I needed to stop dressing like I was in mourning. "Listen," Marcus said, lowering his voice. I know things ended badly between us. Really badly. And I want you to know that I'm sorry. For all of it. For cheating on you. For lying to you. For everything. I looked at him. Really looked at him and felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no longing. Just a vague sense of disappointment at how much time I'd wasted with someone so ordinary. This was the man I'd built my entire adult life around? This man who couldn't even look me in the eye while apologizing? Okay, I said, thank you for apologizing. Do you think? He started, then stopped. Do you think we could maybe get coffee sometime? Just to talk? I feel like there's a lot we never got to say to each other. I don't think that's a good idea, Marcus, I said gently. I've moved on. I think you should too. I have moved on, he said quickly. I'm with Vanessa now. We're really happy together. I just thought maybe we could be friends, you know? After everything. The audacity of it almost made me laugh. Friends. He wanted to be friends. After lying to me for 7 months, after making me feel like I was losing my mind when I questioned him, after calling me boring in text messages to his mistress, he wanted to be friends. I don't want to be friends with you, I said bluntly. I don't wish you ill, but I don't want you in my life in any capacity. I hope you understand that. He looked hurt, which was almost funny. What did he expect? That we'd become buddies who grabbed coffee and laughed about old times? I understand, he said stiffly. Well, take care of yourself, Jen. You too, I said. I watched him walk away, back toward wherever Vanessa was waiting, and then I turned back to the soap display, picking up a bar of lavender that smelled like peace. My hands were still steady. My breathing was still calm. I'd done it. I'd faced him and survived. And more than that, I'd realized he didn't matter anymore. He was just part of my past, not the defining event of my life. That encounter could have ruined my day. A year ago, a month ago, maybe even a week ago, it would have. But today, it didn't. Today, I could see it for what it was. A brief, uncomfortable moment that I'd survived. Nothing more. I went home and painted. Not fire this time. I painted the farmer's market, all bright colors and summer sunshine. I painted people milling around stalls, buying flowers and fruit. I painted life continuing, beautiful and mundane and ordinary. Fall came, bringing cooler weather and the start of a new school year. The kids in the pediatric ward were excited about going back to school, and their energy was infectious. I found myself looking forward to going to work again, not just as a distraction, but because I genuinely loved what I did. It was in late September, almost exactly a year after I'd found Marcus cheating, that everything clicked into place. I was sitting in my backyard on a perfect autumn afternoon, painting a portrait of Biscuit that actually looked like him this time, when I realized I was happy, genuinely, truly happy. Not pretending, not forcing it, not trying to convince myself, I was just happy. The realization made me stop mid-brush stroke. When was the last time I'd felt like this? Before the cheating, certainly, but even before that, had I really been happy? Or had I just been comfortable, mistaking contentment for joy? I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, the woman who'd set fire to her husband's belongings in a fit of rage and pain. I barely recognized her. That woman had been so consumed by anger and hurt that she'd lost sight of everything else. She'd let Marcus's betrayal define her, let it turn her into someone she didn't want to be. But the woman I was now, she was different, stronger, more sure of herself. She knew what she wanted and what she didn't want. She knew that happiness wasn't something someone else could give you or take away. It was something you built for yourself, piece by piece, day by day. I finished the painting of Biscuit and hung it in the hallway, right where a wedding photo of Marcus and me used to hang. Every time I walked past it, it made me smile. This was my home now, my space, filled with things I'd chosen, things that made me happy. I started teaching a free painting class at the community center on Saturday mornings. Nothing formal, just a few hours where anyone could come and paint with me. Some weeks we had 10 people, some weeks just 2 or 3. But I loved it. Loved sharing something I was passionate about with others. Loved seeing people create and experiment and sometimes make a mess. It reminded me that life was messy, and that was okay. Beautiful things could come from mess. One of the regular attendees was a woman named Claudia who was going through her own divorce. She was younger than me, maybe 30, with 2 little kids at home and a husband who'd left her for his secretary. Cliché, she'd said bitterly the first day she came to class. Over the weeks, I watched Claudia transform. She came in angry and bitter at first, slashing paint across the canvas like she was attacking it. But slowly, her paintings became softer, more thoughtful. One Saturday, she painted a butterfly emerging from a chrysalis and she cried when she finished it. I think I'm going to be okay, she told me after class that day. I don't know when, but someday, I think I'm actually going to be okay. You will be, I told her. I promise. It takes time, but you will be. Did you ever do anything crazy? She asked. When you found out your husband was cheating? I hesitated, then decided to tell her the truth. I set all his stuff on fire in my backyard and had to call the fire department. Claudia's eyes went wide, and then she started laughing. Really laughing. The kind of laughter that comes from deep in your belly. No way, she gasped. You actually did that? I actually did that, I confirmed. It was stupid and dangerous and cost me $7,000 in fines. But at the time, it felt like the only thing I could do. I kind of love that, Claudia said, still giggling. I mean, I'm not going to do it, but I love that you did. Learn from my mistakes, I advised. Find a healthier way to process your anger. Like painting? Like painting. There was also Robert, a widower in his 60s who'd lost his wife to cancer 2 years earlier. He painted her from memory every week, trying to capture the way she'd looked when they first met. The paintings were never quite right, he said, but the process of creating them kept her alive for him in some way. And there was a teenage girl named Sophia, whose parents were going through a bitter custody battle. She didn't talk much, just showed up every Saturday and painted dark, swirling abstracts that made my heart ache. After a few weeks, she started staying after class to help me clean up, and eventually she started talking. I feel like I'm supposed to choose, she said one day while we were washing brushes. My mom wants me to hate my dad, and my dad wants me to hate my mom. But I don't hate either of them. I just hate what they're doing to each other. And to me. You don't have to choose, I told her. You're allowed to love them both, even when they're being terrible. And you're allowed to be angry at them both, too. Feelings are complicated. They don't have to make sense. She nodded, tears in her eyes. Thanks. Nobody else gets that. Watching my students work through their pain and grief and anger through art was healing for me, too. It reminded me that everyone was fighting their own battles, carrying their own burdens. My story wasn't unique. Heartbreak and betrayal and loss were universal human experiences. What mattered was how you responded to them, whether you let them destroy you or transform you. Winter came, and with it, my first holiday season as a single woman. It was harder than I expected. Thanksgiving and Christmas had always been big deals for Marcus and me. We'd host elaborate dinners for our families, decorating the house and cooking for days. This year, I couldn't bring myself to do any of that. Instead, I spent Thanksgiving with Daniela and her family. Her kids were teenagers now, loud and funny and full of life. Being around them reminded me that there were different kinds of families, different ways to celebrate. You didn't need a husband to have a meaningful holiday. Her daughter, Maya, cornered me in the kitchen while we were doing dishes. My mom told me what happened with your husband, she said. I'm really sorry. That sucks. It does suck, I agreed. But I'm doing better now. My dad cheated on my mom too, Maya said quietly. Before they got divorced. I was only like 8, so I don't remember much. But I remember my mom crying a lot. And then one day, she just stopped crying and started being herself again. You remind me of her. Strong, you know? Thanks, sweetie, I said, giving her a side hug. That means a lot. Also, Maya added with a grin, I think burning his stuff was kind of badass. Don't tell my mom I said that. I laughed. Your secret's safe with me. Christmas was harder. I almost skipped it entirely, but my mother wouldn't let me. She showed up at my house on December 23rd with a small tree and a box of ornaments. We're decorating, she announced. I'm not letting you mope through Christmas. I'm not moping, I protested weakly. Honey, you're wearing the same sweatshirt you've worn for 3 days straight, and there's paint in your hair. You're moping. She was right. I'd been sliding back into a depression without really realizing it. The gray winter days and the empty house and the memories of holidays past had all combined to pull me under. My mother and I decorated the tree together, and she told me stories about her own divorce decades ago, before she'd met my stepfather. I'd never really thought about the fact that my mother had been through this too, had survived heartbreak and come out the other side. The first Christmas after your father left, she said, hanging a silver ornament on a branch, I locked myself in my apartment and refused to see anyone. I told myself I was fine, that I didn't need anyone. But really, I was just scared. Scared of facing people's pity, scared of admitting how much I was hurting. What changed, I asked. You did, she said simply. You were 4 years old and you asked me why we didn't have a Christmas tree. I realized I was letting my pain steal your childhood, so I pulled myself together, bought a tree, and made Christmas happen. And you know what? It wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. I never knew that, I said softly. We all have our moments of darkness, Jennifer, my mother said. The important thing is not staying there. You've had your moment. You've felt your pain. Now it's time to start living again. I'm trying, I told her. I really am. I know you are, she said, squeezing my hand, and I'm so proud of you. That night, after my mother left, I sat in front of the Christmas tree with Biscuit, drinking hot chocolate and looking at the lights. They were simple white lights, nothing fancy, but they made the whole room feel warm and peaceful. I thought about how much my life had changed in the past year, how much I'd changed. A year ago, I'd been someone who set fires to punish the person who hurt her. Now, I was someone who taught painting classes and decorated Christmas trees with her mother. Both versions of me were valid. Both versions of me were necessary. I'd needed to be that angry, destructive person for a while, to burn away everything that wasn't serving me. And now I needed to be this person, the one who was learning how to build something new from the ashes. New Year's Eve, I spent alone by choice. Daniela had invited me to a party, but I turned her down. I wanted to be by myself, to reflect on the year that had passed and think about the year ahead. At midnight, I stood in my backyard with a glass of champagne, looking up at the stars. Biscuit was next to me, his tail wagging lazily. The neighborhood was quiet except for a few distant fireworks and people shouting, "Happy New Year." "This is going to be my year," I said out loud to Biscuit, to the stars, to myself. "This is the year I figure out who I really am and what I really want." Biscuit barked once like he was agreeing with me. I laughed and took a sip of champagne. Then I went inside, put on some music, and painted until 3 in the morning. I painted a phoenix rising from flames because of course I did. But this time, the phoenix was beautiful and strong and free. This time, the fire wasn't destroying. It was transforming. Spring came again, bringing with it the first anniversary of the fire. I'd been dreading it, worried that the memories would overwhelm me. But when the day came, I felt oddly calm. I could look back on that day with a strange mixture of regret and gratitude. Regret for losing control so completely. Gratitude for the wake-up call it had been. I spent the anniversary planting flowers in the backyard, right where the fire had been. Daffodils and tulips and crocuses, flowers that would come back every year, a reminder that beautiful things could grow from burned ground. As I worked, I thought about everything I'd learned over the past year. I'd learned that anger was a valid emotion, but it couldn't be the only emotion. I'd learned that revenge felt good in the moment, but hollow in the aftermath. I'd learned that healing wasn't linear, that some days I'd feel strong and other days I'd feel broken, and both were okay. I'd learned that I was capable of surviving things I never thought I could survive. Most importantly, I'd learned that I didn't need Marcus or any man to be complete. I was enough on my own, more than enough. That summer, I went to Italy. The trip Marcus and I had been planning, the one we'd been saving for. I went alone, and it was glorious. I wandered through museums and ate amazing food and painted in piazzas. I met other travelers and had conversations in broken Italian and English. I felt free in a way I'd never felt before. The first few days were harder than I expected. I kept thinking about how Marcus and I had planned this trip together, how we'd talked about which cities to visit and which restaurants to try. Every beautiful thing I saw came with a pang of sadness, a reminder that I was supposed to be sharing these moments with someone. But gradually, that sadness transformed into something else. Relief, maybe. Gratitude that I was here on my own terms, making my own choices, not having to compromise or consider someone else's preferences. In Florence, I spent an entire afternoon in the Uffizi Gallery, staring at paintings by masters who'd been dead for centuries. I stood in front of Botticelli's Birth of Venus for so long that a security guard asked if I was okay. "I am," I told him in broken Italian. "I'm more than okay." And I meant it. Looking at that painting, at the goddess rising from the sea, I felt a kinship with her. I, too, was being born into something new. I took a cooking class in Tuscany where I learned to make fresh pasta from scratch. The instructor, a warm Italian grandmother named Lucia, told us that cooking was an act of love. "You put your heart into the food," she said, kneading dough with strong, practiced hands, and the food gives that love back to whoever eats it. I thought about all the meals I'd cooked for Marcus over the years, all that love I'd poured into feeding him, and how little of it he'd returned. But cooking for myself, creating something beautiful and nourishing just for me, that felt like a different kind of love. Self-love, maybe. The kind I'd been missing for too long. In Venice, I got lost in the winding streets, and instead of panicking, I just wandered. I found a tiny bookshop tucked away in an alley where an elderly man sold antique books and prints. He showed me a collection of botanical illustrations from the 1800s, and I bought one of a wild rose. It reminded me that beauty could exist even in thorny places. On my last night in Rome, I sat at a cafe and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. I thought about the woman who'd set fire to her husband's belongings 18 months ago. She seemed like a different person, someone from another lifetime, but she was still part of me. She always would be. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the sunset. Then I opened a text message to Daniela. "You were right," I typed. "The best revenge is living well, and I'm living very well." A few seconds later, she responded with about 5 heart emojis and a text that said, "I'm so proud of you." I put my phone away and ordered another glass of wine. Around me, the cafe buzzed with life and laughter and conversation. Somewhere in the distance, church bells were ringing. The air smelled like espresso and fresh bread and possibility. I was 41 years old. I was divorced. I'd once committed what could technically be classified as arson, and I was happier than I'd ever been in my life. Not because I'd gotten revenge on Marcus, not because I'd won the divorce settlement, but because I'd found myself again. Or maybe, for the first time, I'd actually met myself. The real Jennifer, not the woman who'd shaped herself around someone else's life. When I got home from Italy, I had so many paintings that I didn't know what to do with them all. My spare bedroom was overflowing with canvases. Daniela suggested I have a show, display them somewhere public. The idea terrified me. My paintings were personal, emotional, raw. Did I really want strangers looking at them? But the more I thought about it, the more I warmed to the idea. Maybe someone out there needed to see these paintings. Maybe someone going through their own heartbreak or transformation would find something meaningful in them. I approached the owner of a small gallery downtown, a woman named Regina who'd been running the place for 20 years. I showed her photos of my work on my phone, nervously explaining that I was a nurse, not a real artist, that I'd only started painting again after my divorce. Regina looked through the photos carefully, not saying anything. My heart sank. She was going to say no. Of course she was going to say no. Why would a real gallery want to show paintings by an amateur? "These are powerful," Regina finally said, looking up at me. "Raw. Honest. I'd love to give you a show." "Really?" I asked, shocked. "Really? I think a lot of people would connect with these. When can you bring them in?" We scheduled the show for October, a month that felt fitting given everything that had happened in October the year before. I spent weeks agonizing over which paintings to include, how to arrange them, what to title the show. In the end, I went with something simple: Rising. It felt right. The opening night of the show, I was a nervous wreck. I wore a dress Daniela had helped me pick out, telling me I needed to stop dressing like I was in mourning. I did my hair and makeup, and showed up an hour early to make sure everything was perfect. The paintings looked different hanging on the white gallery walls. More official, more real. I wasn't sure anyone would come besides Daniela and my mother and a few friends from work. But by 7, the gallery was packed. People I knew and people I didn't know, all looking at my paintings, reading the little cards that explained each piece. My mother stood in front of the Phoenix painting for a long time, tears streaming down her face. She didn't say anything when I walked up beside her, just reached out and squeezed my hand. I squeezed back, both of us understanding that some moments don't need words. Kelly and a few other nurses from the hospital came, bringing flowers and wine. They were so excited, so proud, talking about how they'd always known I had this creative side, but they'd never seen it fully expressed before. One of them, a young nurse named Emma, pulled me aside. "I'm going through a breakup right now," she confided. "Nothing as dramatic as yours, but it still hurts. Seeing what you've created from your pain, it makes me think maybe my pain can turn into something beautiful too." "It can," I promised her. "Give it time." A middle-aged man in an expensive suit spent 20 minutes examining the fire painting, the first one I'd created after everything happened. He bought it on the spot, paying more than I'd ever imagined someone would pay for my work. When I asked him why he wanted it, he told me his wife had left him the year before, and he'd been struggling to process the anger. "This painting," he said, gesturing at the chaotic swirls of red and orange and black, "it captures exactly how I feel inside. It's validating somehow, knowing someone else has felt this too and survived it." I stood in the corner with a glass of wine, watching people's reactions. Some stood for a long time in front of certain paintings. Others moved quickly through. A few people cried. Several people bought pieces, little red-soled stickers appearing next to the frames throughout the night. Regina, the gallery owner, was beaming. She kept introducing me to people, collectors, and other artists and journalists from local publications. I felt like an imposter at first, like surely someone would realize I was just a nurse who painted in her spare time, not a real artist. But as the night went on, something shifted. These were my paintings on the walls, my vision, my emotions. my story. That made me an artist, regardless of my training or background. One woman approached me halfway through the night. "Excuse me, are you the artist?" she asked. "I am," I said nervously. "I just wanted to thank you," she said, her eyes shiny with tears. "My husband left me 6 months ago, and I've been feeling so lost. But looking at these paintings, seeing your journey, it gives me hope. It makes me think maybe I'll be okay too." "You will be," I told her, squeezing her hand. "It takes time, but you will be." After she walked away, I had to excuse myself to the bathroom to cry. Happy tears, grateful tears, overwhelmed tears. My paintings, my messy, emotional, imperfect paintings, had meant something to someone, had helped someone. That felt more important than any revenge ever could. The show sold out. Every single painting. I couldn't believe it. Regina said people had connected with the authenticity, the emotion, the story. She asked if I had more work, if I'd be interested in another show the following year. "I guess I'm an artist now," I told Daniela that night after the gallery closed. "You always were," she said, hugging me tight. "You just needed to remember." 2 years after the fire, I was in a completely different place. I'd made the terrifying decision to leave my job at the hospital to pursue painting full-time. It wasn't an easy choice. Nursing had been my identity for so long, and there was security in that steady paycheck, that predictable schedule. But after the gallery show sold out and Regina started getting inquiries about my work from collectors and other galleries, I couldn't ignore the pull anymore. I remember the day I gave my notice. I sat in the nurse manager's office, hands shaking as I explained that I was leaving to pursue art. She looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "You're giving up a stable career with benefits to paint?" she asked. "Are you sure about this, Jennifer?" "I'm sure," I said, though I wasn't sure at all. But I knew if I didn't take this chance, I'd regret it for the rest of my life. The other nurses threw me a going-away party, and Kelly gave a speech that made me cry. "You've always been the person who takes care of everyone else," she said. "Now it's time to take care of yourself and your dreams." Walking out of the hospital for the last time as an employee was surreal. I'd spent so many years in those hallways, had helped so many families through their worst moments, but I also knew I couldn't keep splitting myself between two worlds. If I was going to do this art thing, I needed to commit to it fully. The first few months were terrifying. I taught classes 3 days a week at the community center and spent the rest of my time in my home studio, creating. Money was tight. Some weeks I wasn't sure how I was going to pay all the bills, but I'd never been happier. I was finally doing what I loved, what I was meant to do. I'd adopted a second dog, a scruffy little terrier mix I named Olive, and she and Biscuit were the best of friends. Having 2 dogs to care for gave my days structure, forced me to maintain some routine even when I was tempted to paint until dawn and sleep until noon. I dated occasionally, nothing serious. I'd learned that I liked being single, liked having my own space and my own schedule. Maybe someday I'd want a partner again, but I was in no rush. I was happy with just me. The house felt different now. It wasn't mine and Marcus's house anymore. It was just mine. I'd repainted the walls, changed the furniture, made it into something that reflected who I was now. The backyard where the fire had been was lush and green, full of the flowers I'd planted and some vegetables I was attempting to grow with mixed success. I thought about Marcus sometimes, usually when something random reminded me of him. A song on the radio, a type of beer in the grocery store, the anniversary of the fire. But he didn't take up the space in my mind that he used to. He was just part of my past, not the defining event of my life. I heard through mutual friends that he and Vanessa had gotten married. Good for them, I thought, and meant it. I hoped they were happy. I hoped he'd learned something from our relationship, from the way it ended. But mostly, I just didn't care. They were living their life, and I was living mine, and never the two shall meet. On the 3rd anniversary of the fire, I hosted a bonfire in my backyard. A safe, controlled bonfire in my fire pit, with friends gathered around. We roasted marshmallows and told stories and laughed. Daniela made a toast. "To Jennifer," she said, raising her beer, "who taught us all that sometimes you have to burn everything down to build something better." Everyone cheered and clinked their drinks together. I smiled, feeling the warmth of the fire on my face and the warmth of friendship in my heart. I'd burned Marcus's stuff in a moment of pain and rage, and yes, it had been destructive and stupid and dangerous. But in a way, that fire had been necessary. It had been a physical manifestation of the burning away of my old life, my old self. From those ashes, I'd risen as someone stronger, someone who knew her own worth, someone who didn't need anyone else to complete her. The fire department had come that day, 3 years ago, to put out my revenge fire. But what they couldn't see was that the real fire, the one that mattered, couldn't be extinguished. It was the fire inside me, the one that had been dimmed and nearly smothered during my marriage to Marcus, the fire of my creativity, my passion, my sense of self. That fire was burning brighter than ever now, and nothing could put it out. As I sat around the bonfire with my friends, dogs at my feet and stars overhead, I realized something important. The best revenge wasn't the fire. The best revenge wasn't winning the divorce settlement or selling my paintings or any external measure of success. The best revenge was this: being happy, being whole, being authentically, unapologetically myself. Marcus had betrayed me, had tried to diminish me, had called me boring, but here I was, living a life full of color and creativity and love. Not romantic love, necessarily, but the love of good friends and loyal dogs and meaningful work. The love of self. That was the real story. Not the fire that brought the fire department, not the dramatic moment of destruction, but the quiet, steady work of rebuilding, the daily choice to keep growing, keep creating, keep moving forward, the journey from ashes to something beautiful. I was no longer defined by what Marcus did to me. I was defined by what I did in response. And what I did was rise.